Chapter 77. The tide had submerged the glass dome of the Epiragon conference suite entirely. Opening her eyes, Ray watched the steady pull of a turtle's breaststroke as it swam down to the seabed, dragging itself to the silent statues below, motionless on the ocean floor. The algae and seaweed adorning their bodies swished freely, thriving in the rich tropical water as all manner of sea life explored them. Sculptured from volcanic pumice, some statues floated upwards, straining to reach the daylight above. The sculptor had anchored these floating figures to the seabed with a single tether to keep them at various depths. Swimmers were attached by their navels. A string of mussels on a rope clasped the ankle of a drowning woman. There were skydivers, sleeping children, ballerinas floating and swaying in the water above the others, all bound to the earth by a single cord. The next click of the recliners coming to an upright position brought Ray's attention back into the room. Jolanta was the first to make eye contact, raising an inquisitive eyebrow to her. Ray blinked and smiled. It was time to see the results of her adjustment. No turning back now. She was all in. Excellent. Houston Tapley, the CEO, rubbed his eyes and clapped his hands together. Glad that's done. I trust everything went as planned, Miss Corridon. You can send me a report with the relevant details. I'll forward... No, it didn't. Ray interrupted him, without taking her eyes off Jolanta, savouring the moment with the woman who'd threatened her life. The shuffle of the board members stopped. All eyes were upon her in an instant. Excuse me, Miss Corridon, said Houston. Was there a problem? Two problems, as far as I can tell. Taking her time, Ray pointed a steady finger at Jolanta and Pascal in turn. Him and her. Preposterous. Now listen. The two directors were on the offensive in an instant, but Houston silenced them with a gesture. An ember of suspicion glowed in his eye. Something uneasy turned over in his stomach. Vindia, Jungian, and Cordelian kept their counsel, poker-faced and curious. Kat avoided Pascal's gaze. Turning back to Ray, Houston cautioned the Panmatech. I hope whatever line you're taking here has some substance, Miss Corridon. This board does not take kindly to horseplay and monkey shine. And nor do I, Mr. Tapley. Ray looked at each director in turn. I began my professional practice with a set of guiding standards and principles, chief amongst them the desire to assist clusters like yours in achieving their potential. Scrutinizing the empty space in the middle, she took a deep breath. Now, they may have gotten a little worn, but I intend to maintain my values, and I will not permit your colleagues here to undermine them any further. Grasping the gravity of the situation, the two directors were out of their seats and upon Ray in a heartbeat. Before she had time to process what was happening, they'd seized her shoulders and wrists to physically haul her from the room. Yanking Ray from her recliner, they spun round to march her out, only to meet a tight wall of bodies standing firmly in the way. The other 5 directors stood there, blocking them, staring Jolanta and Pascal down. Fuck me, Ray thought, as her head caught up with the last few microseconds. These genetically modified motherfuckers can move. That won't be necessary, said Cordelian. Release Miss Corridon at once, insisted Vindia. Should the situation require it, our security drones are competent enough to organize any detentions. But Yolanta began. "Surely you've nothing to be concerned about?" Jungian cut her off. "If there's nothing amiss, then we'll soon resolve any misunderstandings." "Now, kindly let go of the panicular modelling technician," Houston instructed. "We're keen to hear her account, and time, as ever, is money." Blood flowed back into Ray's arms as Yolanta and Pascal released their grip. Seething, they returned to their recliners with as much dignity as they could muster, then sat down tentatively, minds whirring towards their next manoeuvre. Keeping one another in their peripheries, the rest of the board took their places again. Ray looked back at her recliner, but remained standing. It was time to send it home. "I understand this board is divided on the issue of this latest viral outbreak?" she asked. There followed a mix of agreement and surprise at the Pamatech's knowledge of such confidentialities. "Your two colleagues said as much, after abducting me and holding me aboard their airship. You see, your partners here bribed and threatened me to adjust this cluster to alter you in their favour. It appears they don't trust your judgment in such matters. Needless to say, a gross transgression of both my professional boundaries and theirs. An attempt—" "Lies," they cut in. "Don't listen." Ray raised her voice over their protestations and made the statement she'd been leading up to. "An attempt to force your hand, to make you do what they'd decided you must do." "Houston, listen." Yolanta reined in her temper and clung on to whatever conviction she could. "I sincerely hope you're not giving any credence to the bizarre accusations of this technician. Have no doubt about the stain this will leave on your reputation." Pascal took up the baton. "Pure fantasy. She's deliberately trying to divide us. This board cannot tolerate such baseless behaviour." The circle of directors looked around at one another, their glances suspicious and defensive. Houston checked the time, then spoke. "I'm sure we can clear this up quickly enough." He turned to Ray. "So, you claim Yolanta and Pascal met with you aboard their airship, the Numinosity?" Ray nodded. This was it. If they closed ranks on her now, she was finished. Houston turned to his director of digital profits. "Jungian, does the ship's security keep a log?" "Of course," replied the director, running a hand through his stupendous quiff. "The onboard AI will have kept a full record." "Simple, then." Houston addressed Yolanta, her face now as stony as the statues outside. "You'd have no objections to a quick audit, would you?" "Now here—" Pascal's voice caught, and he cleared his throat to continue. "Excuse me, I just don't see how that's relevant. There's some very personal data." "Pascal," Yolanta spoke sternly. It was best if they remained silent. Loose lips would only deepen their troubles at this stage. But her interruption didn't help. When it came down to it, Pascal was more frightened of the board than he was of her. "Besides," he continued, "in the eventuality that anything along those lines did take place, you'll see quite clearly that the genesis of the idea lay with Yolanta in its entirety." "Pascal!" Yolanta snapped. "How? You said I was your buttered cabbage, you deceitful bastard." Enough was enough. The board's suspicions were confirmed. "Security," Houston spoke to the ceiling. Please detain both the executive vice president and the hype and buzz director. Revoke their access privileges with immediate effect. He looked around at the cluster inquisitively. Can I have a second? A chorus of voices responded immediately. It didn't take long for security to confirm Ray's account of events. Shadwell, the deputy director at the Office of Security's Counter-Espionage Division, consulted with the 5 remaining board directors whilst Ray waited in another meeting room. They soon called her into a viewing gallery overlooking the underwater sculpture park. The Numinosity stood docked nearby. She watched the security drones crawling over the surface, gathering and logging whatever evidence they could. Vindia, do pour the champagne. Looks like our technician here could do with a drink. Jurian smiled as a glass flute made its way into Ray's hand and filled with fizz. A toast to you, Miss Corridon. Our sincere gratitude. An eager round of chinks and slurps followed. I knew something was misfiring with those two, said Cordelian, shaking his head as agreement rippled around the others. I could just feel it. Call it a hunch, call it a refined sense of intuition. Guess I just have a nose for these things. Nevertheless, without your help, Miss Corridon, we might have been severely misled. They wanted to influence your policy on this new virus, Ray said. Correct. It's not public knowledge yet, but it looks like this bug may lead to infertility on an unprecedented scale. We were split. Some of us wanted to invest in vaccinations, go down that route. Pascal and Yolanta were happy for the sickness to spread. They'd rather expand our fertility services into areas we did not. Unethical, I presume. Perhaps. That's not for me to say. Unprofitable. That was my concern. Cordelian looked over to Kat Ehrenheim, the production director with the ponytail. Either way, I think we're now clear which direction we're going. Aren't we, Kat? We are, yes. A solid vaccination program, Kat conceded. Having previously supported Yolanta and Pascal's strategy, she'd had to do some serious backpedaling. Should provide a reliable margin, she said into the bottom of her champagne flute. A reliable margin, Ray echoed her. Of course. The Panmotech took a step towards the window and looked out at the Numinosity. So what does the future hold for your ex-colleagues, then? We were just discussing that, Jurian answered. There's a metastasis prison in development, could be interesting, or, and this was my preference, a stint in the remilitarized zone. The RNZ? Seems fitting, Vindia said. What a waste. Houston shook his head with regret. They were certainly a creative pair. I have to say, I wasn't entirely opposed to their approach to this fertility scenario. Had its merits, but attempting to force our hand in such a manner, really, just deplorable. After taking a draught, Vindia spoke up. Of course, we'll honour the financial agreement Yolanta and Pascal made with you. I believe the funds are already transferred. She shared a glance with a few of the others. But we also agreed on a little bonus. As you're aware, Pascal and Yolanta had joint ownership of the bespoke airship you see out there, the Numinosity. They no longer have any use for such a luxury, so we thought it fitting to gift this particular asset to you. It is a most singular craft, quite priceless. Vindia reached over and clinked her glass against Ray's. Check your eyeline. You have all permissions and full command, Congratulations. Ray's expression remained fixed, a placid, easy-going mask she hoped nobody would fathom. How generous, she said. Thank you. You should know, I've never actually flown an airship before. The onboard systems will show you the ropes. There's very little for you to do. We'll prep the AI for your arrival. It'll soon seem remarkably familiar. Now, I hate to rain on the parade. Cordelian drained his glass while checking his eyeline. But I'm running late. It's been an eventful morning, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to make my apologies. Time and tide wait for no man. Cordelian is quite right, said the CEO. We all have busy schedules, and, he spoke to himself, seeing as we need to appoint 2 new directors, I really ought to contact the shareholders and arrange a meeting. You've done us an enormous service, Ray, said Kat, her smile a little too tight, her tone as dry as old parchment. What a remarkable lady you are. Keep a window open in your schedule. We will get in touch should the need arise.